In this example, I'm going to use the MIDI clock messages coming from live and going to the Teensy as a way of timing the reading of two pots. And I'd like for each pot to be read on alternating 16th notes. And I'd like for each pot to generate a note on and a note off, and the pitch will come from the pot. So I've got, first of all, some variables. I've got an LED variable for the LED pin number, which is 13 on the Teensy. I've got a count variable that keeps track of my counting for the 24 pulses per quarter note. And then I've got two variables for pitch for each of my pots to store the pitch variable in. And then I've just got a value for velocity, which is 127, so maximum velocity, and my MIDI channel that I'm going to send my information on, which is channel 1. In my setup, I've got 4 handle functions again, and these correspond to start messages, stop messages, continue messages, and MIDI clock messages. And the 4 functions that these will call every time they're received on the Teensy are called my start, my stop, my continue, and my clock. I'm also setting the LED pin as an output pin because I want to turn it on and off. In my main loop, all I'm doing is reading my MIDI data from the USB MIDI bus, and if I've received some messages from if I've received some messages from Ableton, then those messages will be processed accordingly, and I'll only respond to start, stop, continue, and clock messages on the Teensy. Now, when I receive a start message on the Teensy, I'm going to reset my counter to 0. When I receive a stop message on the Teensy, I'm just going to send my LED to off. And same thing with my continue, I'm going to treat it the same as a start message, so I'm just going to set the counter to off to 0. Here's my clock message, which is executed 24 times every quarter note from live. So every time live starts playing the transport, it's going to start sending out clock messages 24 times per every quarter note. And of course those intervals will change depending on the BPM. Firstly, I'm going to turn my LED on. If the count is between 0 and 11, then the LED will be high. And if the count is between 12 and 23, then the LED will be low. That's because I'm firstly inverting this value, and I'm also dividing it by 12. Now I'm going to use the fact that we know that our clock value or our count value is going to be somewhere between 0 and 23, depending on how far through each beat we're progressing. And I want to send my note ons and note offs as 16ths. So basically I want to send a note on every 16th subdivision through the beat, and I want to send a note off a 32nd later than every 16th. So I want to go note on, note off for the first pot, then note on, note off for the second pot, and then repeat that note on, note off for the first pot, and then note on, note off for the second pot. And in each case, the pitch will come from each pot. So to start off with, in the case of the count being 0 or 12, in other words, we're taking the modulo 12 of the count to divide it up into 16ths. I'm going to read the pitch from analog 14. You can see with my hardware setup, I've got these 2 pots set up. Pot 1 and pot 2 connected to A14 and A15, and they're also connected to 3 volts and ground respectively. So my value pitch 1 is going to come from analog 14. I'm then going to scale pitch 1 to be more useful for a MIDI pitch range. In this case, this is going to be 48 to 72. And in terms of MIDI pitches, that would give us a 2-octave range. And then I'm going to generate a note on that I'm going to send to live. And it's going to take its pitch from the pot. Its velocity value is going to be 127, as we set earlier. And the channel is going to be 1. Now, 3 clock counts later, once again taking the modulo of 12, and we're going to send the corresponding note off for our first note on. So we're just reusing that value pitch 1, which we read earlier from analog A14. Velocity is 0 because it's a note off, and the channel is 1. Now it's on to pot number 2, and we're going to generate a note on from that. That's only if modulo count 12 is 6. Going to read into pitch 2 the value of analog read A15, which is going to give us between 0 and 1023 because it's a 10-bit value. Pitch 2, we're then going to scale to a suitable MIDI pitch range again, so between 48 and 72 semitones, which is a 2-octave range. And then we're going to generate a note on based on pitch 2. Once again, same velocity of 127 and same channel of 1. Finally, we're going to generate the corresponding note off when count modulo 12 is 9. It's going to be pitch 2, velocity of 0, and channel 1 as the note off. Finally, we're going to increment the count by 1, and then as soon as the count is above 23, we know we've received 24 MIDI clocks messages in total from live. That's going to reset back to 0. The important thing here is that by taking the modulo 12 of count, we're dividing up each beat into 2 halves, and those 2 halves are being repeated. So we're going note on, note off, note on, note off, and then repeating for count 12 to 23. Let's upload this and try it out. In my MIDI setup for live, I'm going to go up to my preferences, and I'm going to select link and MIDI, and then under output for my Teensy, I've sent sync to on, and input for the Teensy I've sent track to on. That's because I want to send my sync signal from Ableton to the Teensy, and I also want to send my note messages from the Teensy back to Ableton. So that's why the track input is set to on. I can then set the this track here that I've got a synth on. I can set that to record with my input set to auto. I can then hit play and live. And we can record this data into Ableton as well. Now if I turn the metronome on, we can hear that the timing is quite off for these notes. Even though they're synced, the notes aren't starting exactly on the bar. And if you look at the data, we can see that corresponding offset at the start of the first bar just here. Now this timing issue comes from the audio driver, and if I had my buffer size set to a smaller size, this would be much less of an issue. So if you're going to try this, make sure you set your buffer size to a small size.